Joaquin Guzman, known to the world as El Chapo, was more than a drug lord. He was a legend, a ghost, a man who seemed untouchable. By the time his empire stretched across continents, he had become synonymous with cunning, ruthlessness, and survival. But what truly made him infamous wasn't just the billions of dollars, the cartel, or the violence. It was his ability to escape the law, not once, but twice, in ways so daring they seemed impossible. Every escape was a story of ingenuity and audacity. Every escape cemented his reputation as the untouchable king of the Mexican drug world. The first escape came in 2001 from a maximum security prison in Mexico. While authorities assumed he was locked away for good, El Chapo had other plans. With meticulous planning, he exploited weaknesses no one thought existed. He disguised himself as a laundry cart, slipping past guards in broad daylight, moving with the confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. And just like that, he vanished, leaving a wake of shock and disbelief. The nation was stunned, the government humiliated, and his enemies in awe. El Chapo was free, and with each day outside, he rebuilt his empire, stronger and more secretive than before. But even kings make mistakes. Law enforcement, humiliated by the audacity of his escape, intensified their efforts. For over a decade, they chased him, traced his movements, infiltrated his network, but he remained a ghost. Then, in 2014, after years of cat and mouse, the Mexican authorities finally captured him again. This time, he was imprisoned in a fortress that was supposed to be escape-proof, a maximum security facility designed to hold the most dangerous criminals, layered with surveillance, armed guards, and strict routines. For most, this would have been the end. For El Chapo, it was only another challenge. And in 2015, the unthinkable happened again. El Chapo disappeared, not through a daring disguise or a simple trick, but via a mile-long tunnel dug underneath his cell, complete with ventilation, lighting, and a motorcycle on rails to move him quickly to freedom. The escape stunned the world and humiliated the Mexican government once more. Media outlets around the globe ran headlines proclaiming him the world's most infamous escape artist. Every criminal and law enforcement officer alike was fascinated and terrified by his genius. He had proven that no prison could hold him, that no system could contain the reach of his mind and ambition. For a time, El Chapo's legend grew. The empire he controlled expanded even further, reaching new markets, securing new alliances, and eliminating rivals with surgical precision. He lived in luxury, always on the move, always in shadows, always one step ahead of the law. He was a man who seemed untouchable, who manipulated fear, loyalty, power as effortlessly as breathing. But legends have a breaking point, and hubris is a dangerous companion. The third attempt at freedom was different. This time the stakes were higher, and the world was watching. International authorities were involved. Mexican and American governments coordinated like never before, and El Chapo's network was under constant surveillance. Technology, intelligence, and human informants converged in a way that had never happened before in his career. He was no longer just a criminal mastermind operating in isolation. He was a target under a global microscope. In July 2015, the final pursuit reached its climax. After months of tracking, intelligence, and careful planning by authorities, El Chapo was captured in a daring raid in Los Mochis, Sinaloa. This time, there was no tunnel, no laundry cart, no clever disguise. Every move he made had been predicted, monitored, and countered. The law had caught up with him. For the first time, the man who had escaped the impossible was truly cornered. The consequences were monumental. He was extradited to the United States, tried, and sentenced to life in prison. Every empire he had built, every fortune amassed, every act of brilliance that had kept him alive was stripped away. El Chapo, once untouchable, once invincible, was finally confined. His freedom gone forever. The man who had become a global symbol of cunning, audacity, and criminal genius was reduced to a prisoner, watched constantly, unable to escape again. And yet, his legend lives on. Stories of his escapes, his ingenuity, and his power continue to circulate, inspiring awe, fear, and fascination. But the final lesson of El Chapo's life is clear. No matter how clever, daring, or untouchable someone may seem, the consequences of hubris, exposure, and relentless pursuit are inevitable. Freedom, no matter how long it lasts, can be taken in an instant. And for El Chapo, the third escape attempt, the one that was meant to cement his immortality, ended up costing him everything: his freedom, his empire, and the invincibility he had spent a lifetime cultivating. The tale of El Chapo is not just a story of crime, it's a story of obsession, power, and the fragile line between brilliance and downfall. It reminds the world that even the smartest, boldest, and most audacious can be undone by the very world they thought they controlled. Every escape, every gamble, every act of daring ingenuity had its price, and in the end, the price was absolute. After his first miraculous escape in 2001, El Chapo's legend began to grow, almost mythically. In the criminal underworld, he became a symbol not just of power, but of audacity. Every whispered tale of his disappearance, slipping out disguised as a laundry cart, vanishing in broad daylight, made rivals AC and allies worshipful. But beyond the daring, it was his meticulous preparation that truly set him apart. Every detail, every loophole, every guard shift was studied and exploited. He wasn't merely lucky, he was strategic, calculating, and ruthless in his precision. For over a decade, he rebuilt his empire in secrecy. By 2014, he controlled one of the most sophisticated drug networks in the world, spanning continents. Cocaine, methamphetamine, marijuana, every shipment was orchestrated with military-like precision. Borders, customs, and law enforcement were mere obstacles to be studied and bypassed. His organization was not just a cartel. It was an empire, and he was its untouchable emperor. But his audacity made him visible, a target of unprecedented attention. The 2015 escape from a maximum security prison was even more elaborate, revealing a level of ingenuity that shocked the world. A mile-long tunnel, complete with ventilation and lighting, dug straight under his cell, connected to a motorcycle on rails to speed his exit. Every guard, every camera, every protocol had been considered and accounted for. When he emerged from the tunnel, it wasn't just freedom, it was a statement. He was untouchable, and the world would never forget it. Headlines called him the escape artist king, and the Mexican government faced global ridicule, but each escape carried hidden costs. Every disappearance forced him deeper into the shadows, severing personal ties, increasing paranoia, and heightening the stakes. Trust became a commodity more precious than gold. Associates and lieutenants had to be chosen with precision. Any misstep could expose him. Every success further cemented his mythos, but also drew the relentless gaze of the law. International authorities, now fully aware of his genius, began coordinating like never before. Mexico, the United States, and even Interpol pooled resources, intelligence, and surveillance to track the man who seemed to evade fate itself. As his empire expanded, cartel rivals grew more desperate. Blood feuds erupted across territories. Competitors plotted assassinations and sabotage. El Chapo was forced into constant vigilance, balancing ambition with survival. Every meeting, every deal, every transport of narcotics had to be executed with surgical precision. One mistake could cost him not only his freedom, but his life. Yet, even under such pressure, he maintained control, steering his organization like a chess master moving pieces on a board, always thinking 3-4 moves ahead. The third pursuit was different from all that came before. Authorities studied him like a living puzzle, analyzing patterns, predicting behaviors, and intercepting communications. Technology now played a role that had been absent during his previous escapes. Cameras, drones, and electronic surveillance made even the smallest misstep potentially fatal. Informants, once loyal, were now sources of intelligence for the government. Every ally became a potential threat, every trusted face a possible betrayer. The walls were closing in. Then came the final confrontation. In July 2015, a coordinated raid in Los Mochis, Sinaloa, executed with precision, brought the empire to a sudden, shocking halt. El Chapo, despite his brilliance and experience, was caught off guard. For the first time, there was no escape, no tunnel, no disguise. The law had anticipated every contingency, every move, every contingency he might attempt. The man who had once laughed at maximum security prisons, who had mocked the Mexican government, who had become a symbol of audacious freedom, was finally cornered. The consequences were absolute. He was extradited to the United States, where he faced trial for a lifetime of crimes, drug trafficking, money laundering, murder, and corruption. Every empire he had built, every shipment, every act of brilliance that had once made him untouchable, became evidence against him. The headlines that once celebrated his audacity now chronicled his downfall. El Chapo, the man who had outsmarted the world twice, was now powerless, confined, and stripped of the freedom he had always taken for granted. But the story does not end with capture alone. Even in prison, his presence loomed large. Stories of his escapes, his cunning, and his empire circulated in whispers among inmates, law enforcement, and criminal organizations. He remained a figure of fascination and fear, a symbol of the fine line between genius and hubris. For El Chapo, the third attempt at freedom was not just a failed escape, it was a reckoning. The man who had eluded fate twice had finally met its full weight, and in doing so lost everything he had spent a lifetime cultivating. In the end, the legacy of El Chapo is both cautionary and mythic. It is a tale of audacity, genius, and relentless ambition, but also of inevitable consequences. It shows the dangers of hubris, the fragility of power, and the certainty that even the most cunning individuals can be brought down when the world aligns against them. His life was a testament to brilliance, ruthlessness, and the price of freedom in a world ruled by law, chaos, and greed. El Chapo's story is not merely about crime. It is about the human obsession with power, the relentless pursuit of survival, and the high cost of outsmarting the world. Every daring escape, every meticulously planned maneuver, every empire built from blood and fear ultimately led to a single, unavoidable truth. No one, not even a man as brilliant as Joaquin Guzman, can escape the consequences forever. And in the end, the man who escaped twice and believed himself untouchable learned the harshest lesson of all. Some risks, no matter how cleverly taken, carry a price that is impossible to pay. Even after his capture in 2015, the shadow of El Chapo stretched far beyond the prison walls. His empire had become a global network, touching every corner of the drug trade from Mexico to the United States, Europe, and even Asia. Yet for all his brilliance, the man who had once slipped past the eyes of the law twice could no longer operate in the shadows. Every former ally, every courier, every lieutenant now faced scrutiny. The empire that had been built with precision began to crumble, exposed piece by piece. In court, the full scale of his criminal activities came to light. Prosecutors painted a picture of a man who had orchestrated murders, bribed politicians, and manipulated the very systems designed to catch him. Each story of corruption and violence added weight to the legend, but also stripped away the mystique. The daring escapes that once inspired awe were now framed as audacious acts that had long-term consequences, endangering lives and destabilizing entire communities. The man who once seemed untouchable was humanized and vulnerable. Behind the headlines, there was also the personal toll. The life of constant movement, fear, and secrecy had exacted a price. Relationships, loyalty, and trust were fragile commodities in his world, and betrayal was always a heartbeat away. Many of those closest to him had turned informant, some willingly, some under duress. Friends had become enemies, allies had been imprisoned, and even his closest family lived under scrutiny. El Chapo's genius had kept him free, but it had also isolated him in ways no one outside the cartel could understand. Yet, even in the darkest cells of a high-security prison, El Chapo's mind remained sharp. He studied the law, he calculated risks, and he learned from every misstep. The escapes that had once defined him became lessons in strategy, in patience, and in understanding the balance between audacity and caution. Every move he had made outside prison now became part of a story he could only relive in memory. And though his physical freedom was gone, his legend continued to grow, carried by whispers in the streets, news reports, and the imagination of the public. But there was a cruel irony in his downfall. The very genius that had allowed him to escape twice, the creativity that had made him legendary, ultimately contributed to his undoing. His fame, the notoriety that had once shielded him from enemies, had attracted unprecedented attention. International agencies collaborated as never before. Technologies that did not exist during his first escape were now used against him: satellites, drones, wiretaps, and advanced tracking systems. He had lived by exploiting the gaps in society. The world had now closed every gap, and he found himself trapped by his own legend. Even after sentencing, the stories of his escapes captivated the world. Movies were made, documentaries aired, and books chronicled his life. To some, he was a symbol of cunning brilliance. To others, a warning of the destructive power of hubris. Every tale of his audacious maneuvers, every escape tunnel, every disguise, and every narrow escape became part of a global narrative about ambition, greed, and the limits of human ingenuity. El Chapo's story is ultimately a story of extremes of power, extremes of risk, and extremes of consequence. It teaches that intelligence, courage, and cunning can allow a man to cheat the world for a time, but they cannot change fundamental truths. Laws, consequences, and human determination are forces that even the most brilliant cannot escape forever. And for El Chapo, the final lesson came with clarity. No empire, no matter how vast, no tunnel, no disguise, no brilliance can protect a man from the inevitable reckoning that follows. And so the legend remains larger than life, terrifying and fascinating, a cautionary tale for generations to come. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman will be remembered not just for the billions he amassed or the power he wielded, but for the audacity with which he lived, the brilliance with which he executed the impossible, and the ultimate price he paid for believing. He could outsmart the world forever. His escapes are history, his capture is fact, and his life is a story that will continue to echo in infamy for decades. Even as he sat behind the reinforced walls of a high-security prison, El Chapo's mind never stopped moving. The world outside continued its chaos, but he was confined to routines, to guards, to surveillance, cameras that followed his every move. He could no longer command empires, orchestrate escapes, or manipulate the shadows. The freedom he had taken for granted, a freedom he had risked everything to protect, was gone. And yet, in that loss, there was a strange kind of clarity. He reflected on the two escapes that had cemented his legend. Each had been a masterpiece of planning, a testament to audacity, to daring, to human ingenuity. But they had also been warnings. Each close call, each moment of near capture, had been a reminder that no matter how clever he was, the world was vast, persistent, and unforgiving. And now, with the third capture, the game was over. The man who had once laughed in the face of maximum security prisons, who had tunneled beneath walls that should, held him, who had vanished in broad daylight and emerged as untouchable. That man was finally trapped. The empire he had built piece by piece with blood, fear, and brilliance began to crumble almost immediately. His couriers were arrested, his operations exposed, and his allies either fled or turned informant. The money, the power, the control, all of it was slipping away faster than he could comprehend, and with it went the illusion of invincibility he had spent a lifetime crafting. For the first time, Joaquin Guzman was not the predator, he was the prey. a symbol of what happens when hubris meets relentless determination. And yet, the world could not help but be fascinated. Every newspaper, every news outlet, every whisper in the criminal underworld told the story of the man who escaped impossible odds twice and then lost everything the third time. To some, he was genius incarnate, a criminal mastermind beyond comprehension. To others, he was a cautionary tale, proof that even the most brilliant, daring, and cunning are bound by the rules they try to defy. History, it seemed, would remember him for both his brilliance and his downfall. In the quiet of his cell, he understood a fundamental truth: freedom is never guaranteed. Power is fleeting, and the more visible you make yourself, the closer you are to destruction. He had outrun the law, the enemies, and even fate itself for years, but no tunnel, no disguise, no plan could change the final equation. The third capture had been inevitable, a consequence of a lifetime lived on the edge, where every decision carried risk, and every triumph demanded its price. The story of El Chapo is one of contradictions. It is a story of brilliance and recklessness, of audacity and consequence. It is a story of a man who became larger than life, who evaded capture when all odds were against him, who commanded loyalty and fear with equal force, and who ultimately paid the price for living too boldly in a world that does not forgive mistakes. His escapes were legend. His capture was history. And his legacy, terrifying, fascinating, and unforgettable, serves as a reminder that even the untouchable can fall. In the end, Joaquin Guzman's life was a masterclass in both power and peril. He had lived like no other, ruled like no other, and dared like no other. And yet, for all his brilliance, all his cunning, all his daring escapes, the final truth remained unshakable. The world catches up, the law endures, and no empire, no matter how vast, can withstand the consequences forever. El Chapo escaped twice, challenged the impossible, and mesmerized the world. But the third time, the price was absolute. And for the man who had once been untouchable, that was the ultimate lesson of all. Even behind bars, El Chapo's story continued to echo across the globe. Cartel wars flared in his absence, territories shifted, and the millions he once controlled began to vanish. Associates who had once obeyed without question now scrambled for survival. The empire he had built, a fortress of influence and fear, crumbled like sand slipping through fingers. And yet, even in this chaos, his legend grew. People whispered about the tunnels, the audacious escapes, the cunning deals, and the man who had mocked the strongest prisons in the world. In those quiet, dark nights of confinement, Guzman was forced to confront a reality he had never faced before: mortality, vulnerability, and the limits of control. For years he had believed himself untouchable, invincible, a force that no law, no enemy, no circumstance could bind. But with the third capture, the truth was undeniable. Every risk, every gamble, every moment of daring brilliance carried a cost, and now he was paying it in full. The freedom he had once taken for granted was gone forever, replaced by cold steel bars, strict routines, and inking surveillance. And yet, paradoxically, this confinement did not diminish his power and memory. El Chapo had become a symbol, a myth, a story told in hushed tones across the world. The man who had escaped twice was now immortalized not just as a criminal, but as a mastermind who had defied impossible odds. From the streets of Sinaloa to the boardrooms of DEA operations, from the whispers of terrified rivals to the fascination of journalists, his life was a cautionary tale, but also a legend of audacity, ingenuity, and risk. Even as he reflected on his past, the lessons were undeniable. Power is fleeting. Freedom can vanish in a heartbeat. Visibility is dangerous. No tunnel, no bribe, no disguise, no matter how brilliant, can shield a man forever from the consequences of his actions. The third capture was a reminder of something more universal than crime, that every choice, every bold move carries a weight. Every empire, no matter how carefully constructed, has an expiration, and every man, no matter how brilliant, faces a reckoning. El Chapo's story ended not with a bang, but with inevitability. The world had caught up with the man who had lived outside its rules, who had challenged its limits, and who had rewritten what it meant to escape. For the viewers, the takeaway was both thrilling and sobering. Brilliance and audacity can achieve the impossible, but only for so long. And when the walls close in, even legends must confront the immutable truth. No one, not Eve, and Joaquin Guzman can escape forever. The echoes of his daring escapes, the audacity of his empire, and the magnitude of his downfall would resonate for decades. And for those who study his life, one fact remains crystal clear. El Chapo's story is not just about crime, not just about power, and not just about freedom. It is about human ambition, hubris, and the ultimate price of defying the world. The man who escaped twice and lived larger than life, finally, inexorably, learned what no amount of cunning could ever teach him. Some games cannot be won forever, and the world watched, riveted, as the untouchable fell. Even as the world moved on, the legend of El Chapo refused to fade. Cartels rose and fell, rivals took over territories, and law enforcement agencies adapted, but the stories of his audacious escapes remained etched in history. Each tunnel he dug, each disguise he used, each calculated risk he took became a blueprint for criminal ingenuity and a cautionary tale for those who sought to follow in his footsteps. People still whispered about the man who had cheated death and law enforcement twice, and those whispers carried a mix of awe and fear. Yet behind the legend, there was a man who had learned the ultimate truth. No matter how clever, how daring, or how powerful, human ingenuity has limits. The empire he had built, the billions he had amassed, and the influence he wielded were all fragile constructs, dependent on secrecy, loyalty, and timing. Once once visibility reached its peak, the very genius that had protected him became a liability. His third capture was not just a prison sentence. It was the reckoning of a lifetime, the culmination of risks taken, rules broken, and borders crossed. In the cold confines of maximum security confinement, Guzman had time to reflect. Every ally who betrayed him, every shipment that failed, every corrupt official who turned against him, it was all part of a chain reaction that even his brilliance could not halt. For the first time, he confronted not just the consequences of his actions, but the fragility of human ambition. He had outrun the law, outsmarted enemies, and built a global empire from the ground up. Yet all of it had depended on timing, luck, and fear, and once those variables shifted, the empire crumbled like sand through fingers. His story also became a mirror for the world outside. People looked at El Chapo and saw the extremes of human behavior, intelligence, cunning, and audacity taken to their limits. But paired with arrogance, hubris, and overexposure, the man who had been untouchable was now just another inmate, watched, counted, and controlled. And yet, paradoxically, the myth persisted. Even in confinement, the world continued to tell his story. Documentaries, films, books, and podcasts chronicled every daring move, every escape, and every misstep. He had become immortal, not in freedom, but in legend. And perhaps that was the cruelest irony. The genius who had danced with danger and laughed in the face of impossible odds was now remembered not for the life he lived, but for the life he lost. The lessons were clear. Audacity can inspire awe, brilliance can command fear, and power can bend the world, but none of it is permanent. For El Chapo, the third capture was the ultimate lesson, one that no tunnel, no disguise, no bribe, and no act of cunning could ever avoid. Time and consequence catch up to all, no matter how clever the mind, no matter how bold the action. In the end, Joaquin Guzman's life remains a story of extremes. It is a story of brilliance and risk, of power and downfall, of audacity and inevitability. The man who escaped twice, who lived like a shadow in a world of light, who defied authority at every turn, finally faced the ultimate reality. No empire, no matter how vast, no tunnel, no matter how ingeniously constructed, and no reputation, no matter how fearsome, can survive the relentless passage of time and consequence. And the world watched, captivated and horrified, as the untouchable fell, leaving behind a legend that will never die. But the final chapter of El Chapo's story was not just about prison walls, cameras, or legal consequences. It was about the fragility of human ambition, the cost of audacity, and the terrifying weight of legacy. Even as he sat in confinement, every story of his past escapes played over and over in his mind. Every tunnel dug, every guard outwitted, every daring risk that had made him untouchable. For years the world had feared him, revered him, whispered his name in awe. And yet all of that, all the brilliance, all the power, all the wealth, came crashing down in an instant. The third capture was unlike the first two. This time there would be no clever disguise, no secret passage, no calculated distraction. The law, international agencies, and technology had evolved. Every move he might have tried was anticipated, monitored, and countered. The tunnels that had once been his lifelines were meaningless. The bribes that had once silenced authorities could no longer protect him. The fear he had wielded like a weapon had diminished because now he was alone, isolated, exposed, and powerless. And it was not just the loss of freedom that shocked him. It was the loss of control. The empire he had built with precision, patience, and audacity, the vast network of trafficking, loyalty, and influence, began to collapse almost immediately. Allies turned informant, shipments were intercepted, and rival factions moved in to fill the void. What had once been unstoppable was now unraveling in real time. Every decision, every act of cunning, every brilliant move of the past could not save him, and in that moment, the man who had escaped twice realized the harshest truth of all: the higher you rise, the harder you fall, and some falls are unavoidable. But even in defeat, his story left the world gasping. For decades, he had been a symbol of audacity, a living legend who had mocked impossible odds. Now, that same legend became a lesson carved into history. Movies, books, and documentaries would immortalize his life: the escapes, the tunnels, the wealth, the violence, the genius. But they would also immortalize his downfall, the shocking final capture that proved no one is beyond the reach of consequence. And the cruelest, most shocking part? Even after all the warnings, all the narrow escapes, all the near misses El Chapo had underestimated, one truth: fame is a double-edged sword. The very notoriety that had protected him in shadows had ultimately betrayed him in light. The world that had admired his cunning now watched with relentless scrutiny. Every move, every contact, every word, nothing went unnoticed. The man who had once seemed untouchable, who had outwitted the strongest prisons in the world, was finally trapped not just by steel and bars, but by the unstoppable force of global justice. The audacity of his life, the brilliance of his mind, the empire he built, and the terror he inspired, all of it culminated in one final, shocking truth: no matter how clever, how daring, or how fearless a man might be, the world has a way of catching up. El Chapo had escaped twice, had mocked the limits of human ingenuity, had lived larger than life. But the third time, the cost was absolute. Everything he had built, everything he had risked, everything he had commanded, vanished. The untouchable fell, the genius was captured, and the legend became a chilling reminder that no empire, no matter how vast, can survive forever, and no man, no matter how brilliant, can escape the final reckoning. Even as he was led away in handcuffs for the last time, the world could not look away. Every whisper of his escapes, every story of his empire, every tale of audacity and fear would continue to echo for generations. El Chapo had lived like a shadow over nations, a man who defied the impossible, and yet, in the end, he became proof of a timeless truth: the higher you climb, the harder you fall, and some falls are designed to be unforgettable. The man who had once been untouchable was now history, and the shock of it would haunt the world forever,